podcast. We're here with Simon Fraser. And Simon, we just spoke a little bit on the phone, and I've been following your work, and just thought it'd be fun to have you on. So it's great to have an opportunity to spend some time with you.
Thanks for having me. I'm pumped to be here.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good. So, let's start at the beginning. It's kind of what we do. And I'd love to hear your path to what you're up to now, but we'll kind of break it into pieces and connect dots and, let people really get to see the full journey. Tell me a little bit about kind of the early part of your life, where you're from, your family, kind of what you were like, as a kid.
Yeah. I grew up in London, England, and I grew up there my whole life. My mum is a historian. She writes biographies, and my dad is an investment banker. Grew up very, very wealthy. Sorry, well off and wealthy. I can't say I meant to say well off, but I grew up very, very nicely.
Uh-huh.
And kind of looking back on it now, no problems whatsoever.
Yeah.
But grew up in nice neighborhood, Notting Hill, very nice. And that was it. I kind of just went to school there, got kicked out of school when I was 10, had a few problems just behaviorally growing up. Went to boarding school when I was 13. Ended up almost getting kicked out of there as well. But then went to college in the States, and now I live in Columbus.
Well, and that's actually, I think, how I first stumbled upon you, was that bit you did about Columbus, and we can talk about Columbus and you being here and why you're here. But let's back up a little bit. I'm curious, and I love that you just kind of came right out and said, that you grew up wealthy, and and that was that. I think sometimes people are a bit hidden with that. They maybe have some sort of insecurity around being privileged or having money or growing up even in like a loving great household or having great parents. Sometimes people feel a little bit hesitant to share that. And so I'm curious for you, if you could just expand upon it. Like, what was it really like for you to grow up in that environment that seems really nice?
You don't know that you're growing up in that environment,
Yeah, right.
because it's just all you know.
Yeah.
And everyone around you is also wealthy.
Hmm.
And so in the same way, like that, fish are swimming around, and that David Foster Wallace story about, the two fish are swimming and another fish comes by and says, "How's the water?" And they're like, "What's water?"
Right.
That's like the same way when you just live in this environment and you're like, people are like, "How's your struggle?" And you're like, "What's struggle?"
Right.
You don't know about it.
Right.
Just because it's everything. And so it's just what it is. And you're not really exposed to a different environment. Obviously you are. It's not like you're fully in a gated community, but it's just it's what you know. You don't really realize how crazy a lifestyle it is until you come to travel and visit new places, go to college, meet new people, all these different things, which will open your perspective, your mind. It was so normal that you convince yourself you have struggle in your life, because you're like, oh, I'm getting bullied and all of these things, and obviously things that do matter. But in the grand scheme of things, when you look back on them and you see how serious you took them, now you look back and you're like, that's hilarious that you thought, or that I thought I was having a tough childhood.
You were almost like fabricating things that maybe, could have been tough, but relatively speaking, not really. You just wanted to feel what it was like to struggle, or was it for attention? Or tell me a little bit more about that.
I don't think it was feeling, I think it was just the idea of feeling. It wasn't, I didn't think I wanted to feel, I think I was feeling it,
Uh-huh.
just because I wasn't aware of
Mm,
perspective and
I
being
got
like,
it.
oh no,
Yeah.
life's not fair. I didn't get this.
Yeah.
I didn't get this. And then you're like, well,
Well,
come on.
yeah,
You know?
actually, I've got a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so tell me, I'm curious. You said you're a bit of a troublemaker, 10 years old, kicked out of school. What was going on there? Like, and what was it about you that was trouble?
I think it was just pretty straightforward. I was a shy kid. I was kind of just like nervous. and like socially awkward growing up and all that stuff. And then I started getting bullied a little. So I started acting out at school. And so I ended up getting suspended 4 times from this very nice school. But then also you think about all these stories where people get suspended and then their life goes terribly. I just moved to another very nice school and it ended up going fine.
Yeah.
So it was just a bit of like young adolescent acting out,
Yeah.
prepubescent acting out.
Yeah. Well, the reason I ask is, I'm just kind of curious if there's any like connection. I don't know what you were doing to act out, but like you're a comedian, right? And there's got to be some sense of, I don't know, bravery. I mean, and I'm curious. We'll get to it later to talk a lot about what it's like to do what you do. I happen to love comedy, and yet, and I've learned a lot about comedians, and there's oftentimes a lot going on, and so I'm wondering if like you were just like a funny kid, you were like creating, situations that were like not allowed in the proper school, and that was the problem, or if it was something else.
No, I don't think I was really that funny until I was I think I always liked humor and like would write funny stories, but in terms of like a funny person,
Yeah.
I think at the time I was just a brat
Yeah.
is the best way to put it. And then as I grew up, I found like being funny, and because I was such a I was very much a loser,
Mm.
like not cool, had no very much like not a popular kid or anything like that. And I just found like being funny is a very helpful tool to make people like you, which is different from, I would say, making friends. Having people like you is it can be a lot more surface level rather than actually developing deep friendships. But that was at the time how I emerged out of this being this weird kid.
Yeah, it's interesting. You describe yourself as a loser or insecure, quiet, and going through all the suspensions. You go away to boarding school. What's that experience like? Do you start to kind of find yourself there, or is this it doesn't really come until later?
Yeah, it came over time is kind
Hmm.
of what I've come to realize with everything. Like it started out sucking.
Yeah,
That first year was a horrible experience.
yeah.
It's pretty funny it's a funny concept sticking 13-year-old British schoolboys in the same corridor
Uh-huh.
or the same hallway
Yeah.
as 18-year-old fully developed men who play professional rugby and will just be in their underwear and
Uh-huh.
you'll also be in your underwear. And it feels illegal in a lot of ways and it should be. But you're forced to it just took time.
Yeah.
It was a 5-year experience rather than like the 4 years in the US.
Hmm.
But in the same way, it's kind of how I've come to view, I kind of think like over time, everything sucks to start off. But if you push through,
Hmm.
eventually the good stuff will come out of it. That's
Hmm.
kind of how I see
Hmm.
how I saw college and how I see like being here in Columbus or anything in life is just like just push through and the good stuff will come out of it.
Boy, is that true.
Yeah.
I really believe that. And I think it's really way more true than people realize because, you can maybe understand it in like one context that can see how it applies. But I think it's actually true in a lot of things, almost everything, right? I mean, there's certain maybe physical limitations to being able to, the people say they, dunk a basketball kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? But like, I've learned through learning to play guitar or work or all kinds of, physical running marathons, whatever it is. Like, I did a lot of things that I had no idea how to do when I started doing them. And by the time I was done, I was okay at it,
Hmm.
and I think that's, really true for life in general. But it's interesting to hear you say that and that, you've had that experience as well.
Yeah. What marathons have you run, by the way?
Oh, I've run 4. I ran, Columbus. Actually, sorry, I've run 3 full marathons. I ran Columbus, New York, and Washington, DC.
When did Columbus and New York as well. When did you
Okay.
do New York?
Gosh, I don't remember. It's probably been, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago,
Hmm.
something like that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was just checking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a special one.
Hmm.
Yeah. I'm assuming you enjoyed it, or
Hated it.
you hated
Hated
it.
it.
Well,
Yeah.
I shouldn't assume that. Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
But it was still nice to do it.
Yeah, yeah. What did you hate about it?
I cramped up. I've done it 2 years in a
Uh,
row now. And each time I cramped up
mm,
at the same spot.
oh,
And you just have to push through.
yeah,
When you do it the first time, you're like, that's rewarding that
yeah,
my mind can take me that far. And then
yeah,
the second time, you're like, well, I knew my mind could take me that far. So now it was just painful.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
At what mile did you cramp up on?
13.
13. Yeah, that's a
Right. Yeah. Right before I guess it was the Queensboro Bridge.
yeah, that's a long way to
Yeah.
go after, with cramps. Yeah, I have pretty much hit the wall at mile 20 in all three marathons that I've run, and the last 6 miles is pretty excruciating.
Yeah.
It's funny that people think that if you can run 20 miles, what's six more? But that's just not the case. It's a whole
Hmm.
different race. Yeah,
That is very true.
yeah. Okay, so are you finding any interest in your academics, your studies when you're in boarding school? What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I was always an academic. I was always very, good at school and all that stuff. Always good at getting grades, getting good grades and all that stuff. Boarding school, the main thing I just kind of like come out of my shell a bit more. I think,
Hmm.
especially going into my second or third year there, just kind of making friends and adjusting to the environment. Um, I think it was I spent so much time like being. Actually, that's not true. It kind of comes a little bit later, but I think I just made some really good friends, which
Hmm.
was something I just hadn't had in the past. And having a just becoming comfortable and in my environment, it made me, putting myself out there, just becoming more I don't know how, it just kind of naturally, when you spend more time in one place and
Hmm.
you force yourself to stay there rather than just taking the easy way out and being like, I want to move school or something like that,
Hmm.
it forces you to come to terms with it and get comfortable. And I think that's what I did.
And I'm curious about your parents and all of this through the suspensions and going away to boarding school, and you finding yourself. How are they with that? They're supportive, they're patient, they're angry. What is it that how did they handle that?
Yeah, my mom and my dad are very different people.
Yeah.
They're almost polar opposite. My mom is very supportive
Uh-huh.
of anything I would want to do. So
Yeah.
she's, oh, you want. She's English and my dad's American.
Uh-huh.
So she's like, oh, you want to move school? Like, oh, let's move school. And my dad is like, you do not move school. You will stay. Like, what he like force you to. And it's a healthy it's a healthy combination. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it kind of forces you to figure out what the right decision is.
Mhm.
And so they were supportive and they offered help as well. And I went to therapy
Mhm.
and all these things to try. They were like, our kid is super weird, so let's fix him. And so it was very helpful.
Uh-huh.
And they put in a lot of effort to try and make me not become a weird kid. And I
Yeah.
think it helped a lot.
You have siblings?
Yeah, I have a younger brother who's a year younger than me,
Okay.
and a half sister on my mum's side who is 11 years older than me,
Okay.
and she has two kids and a
Uh-huh.
husband, all very nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
And do they live in the States, or
My brother lives in New York.
uh-huh.
He works in real estate,
Yeah.
and my sister lives in London. She is a theater director.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what brings you to the States? Tell me kind of why you chose to come here for college.
Came here for college because I didn't get into Oxford,
Mhm.
which is the poshest statement I could say.
Mhm.
But the way I applied to I applied to Oxford in England,
Mhm.
and then I applied to Yale in America,
Mhm.
and I got into Yale, and and I didn't get into Oxford,
Mhm.
and so that was a pretty easy decision for me.
Sure.
And I was like, good,
Yeah.
I'll be attending Yale,
Nice.
and so then I just went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what'd you study?
I studied history,
Yeah.
but the way it works is you kind of you study so much there
Yeah.
that history was only a third of my courses.
Yeah.
So I studied a lot of the English and poli sci, journalism, and then random courses all over the playwriting,
Yeah.
bunch of things all over the place.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit about kind of your college experience. What are you interested in? What kind of, where are you in your development? Kind of how are you feeling about? You mentioned you made some good friends, so it sounds like you're really coming into your own a bit.
Yeah, college was very much went in and immediately it went pretty well on in terms of the social aspect. It was very easy to make friends. It was a really nice experience. The hardest part was trying to figure out what I wanted to. I think what I wanted, not who I wanted to be, but what I wanted to be. You go to a place like Yale, there are so many extracurriculars activities where you can be whoever you want to be,
Hmm.
and I applied to 27 different extracurriculars my freshman year, and I got rejected from every single one. And I was like, oh God, maybe I don't, everyone's got that inferiority complex
Uh,
about being at a place like that. They're like, I don't deserve to be here. I was like,
yeah.
well, I actually don't think I deserve to be. I think I've got proof of that.
Yeah.
It's not just a feeling.
27 times.
27 times, hearing no 27 times kind of hardens you a bit to rejection.
Mm-hmm.
No different from a night out in Columbus. But the same thing. It's I think that was kind of tough. I was like, oh, and I didn't know what to do. And then it just ended up that sophomore year, I tried out for the stand-up group on campus. And I wasn't good at stand-up either. I should have been rejected for a 28th one. But they took pity on me. I just listed every extracurricular I'd been rejected from. And they were like, okay, well, we can't turn him down now.
That was your application.
Yeah.
And was it really like the 28th last thing that you wanted to do? I mean, like why was that not higher on the list? Was it just like I've got to find something to do and this is all that's left? Or was it actually something that you were really curious about, interested in?
Yeah, I just bumped into a mutual friend, a friend of a friend, who was like, "You should try out for the stand-up group." And I had done stand-up one time that freshman summer in New York, and I was like, "Okay, yeah, I think I can do this."
Mm,
And so I tried out, and it was just a pure happenstance
mm.
that it ended up working out.
That's funny.
Uh,
Well, when I was in college, I had a guy in my fraternity who went to an open mic night, and the whole frat came
mhm.
and he killed. I mean, we were heavily intoxicated and we thought he was just the funniest shit ever. We were just having the best time thinking he killed. And then apparently he went back the next week without the frat and like
Mhm.
totally bombed.
Yep, that's about right. It's the same with doing it's your performance is completely dependent on your audience.
Right.
And I've had the exact same experience. My first time I bombed,
Mhm.
second time I bombed, third time I bombed, fourth time I was like, I should get some friends out just to like boost the confidence a little. Kill.
Yeah, yeah. So, but you said you weren't very good, and bomb, 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 but you stuck with this, and tell me a little bit about kind of, how you see your ability to really continue to put yourself out there. I mean, that's what comedy is so fascinating. I mean, actually doing anything that you really put yourself out there requires some real courage. I have been finding that with stuff like the podcast, doing solo episodes or, more creative outlets, it's easy for me to sit here and ask you questions. But, if you turn the mic on me and I've got to, be fully responsible for carrying the audience, you start to really put some thought into it. It can be a little intimidating, scary. And comedy, I mean, man, there's probably nothing that's more like that, But tell me a little bit about kind of your experience with it and how you, found yourself, really wanting bad enough to be in the situation where you might bomb over and over again.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is delusion. A lot
Mm.
of it is thinking you're way better than you are. And when you get one laugh,
Uh-huh.
you're like, oh, I'm Kevin Hart.
Uh-huh.
And when you look back on when you look back on your sets,
Uh,
like 6 or 7 years later, you're like, oh God, it's crazy.
yeah.
It's crazy you decided to keep going with this.
Uh-huh.
But it's good.
Yeah.
Stand up, like, to advance in anything, I think or not anything, but something like stand up where it's only up to you
Hmm.
about whether you decide to keep going requires a bit of delusion.
Hmm.
Kind of, and almost helpful delusion. It's not identical to running a marathon, I was going to say, but like when you're on that treadmill, when I started trying to train for a marathon, and I like couldn't do a mile, to think you can do 26, like it requires a bit of like, oh, I'm so much better than I am. Right? I mean, better in my head than I am in reality. But then you get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that was part of it. The main thing that appealed to me about stand-up actually was just how meritocratic it was. I think I'd grown up with a lot of things being handed to me, just from education opportunities to just lifestyle opportunities to pretty much when you grow up with money and connections, you really can just have like a really easy life. And I think what I loved about stand-up was it was really it wasn't a case of who you knew or how much money you had, but just, are you funny? Like, can you prove yourself? And now that I'm longer into the industry, I've realized it is a little bit about how much money you have and how many people you know. But so is every industry.
Sure.
And I think stand-up is closer to a meritocracy than perhaps any other form.
Yeah, I get that. And it's interesting to hear you say that, now, you see how it's still helpful to have connections. And yeah, that's probably true with everything, right? I mean, who you know and how you can navigate things, is obviously going to be helpful, but you've got to be funny, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not funny, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so how many, so you graduate from college, and at what point do you decide that you're really going to give this a try?
I was 20 years old. It was my sophomore summer. Sorry, I'd spent a bunch of summers doing random internships here and there, not knowing what I wanted to be, anything like that. And I'd done stand-up a few times. I had done a bit of journalism as well. And I'd somehow stumbled across this job working in Sri Lanka on a tea plantation as a project manager, overseeing 1,000 Sri Lankan farmers, which, if there's any instance of unqualified nepotism, I think it's that. I mean, I didn't speak Sri Lanka. I still don't know what language they speak in Sri Lanka. I should look it up. But I didn't know what I was doing. And it was just my second day there. And there was no Wi-Fi. There was a lizard in my bed. I was working with these drone pilots. The idea was you would spray pesticides on crops using drones instead of using farmers, because it prevents the farmers from being exposed to these harmful carcinogens, which is actually a pretty good idea still in practice. But it doesn't work. It didn't work because one of the 3 drone pilots I was in charge of overseeing was blind. And so the drone kept on crashing.
Yes.
And
that would make it difficult. Yeah.
And so I was just out here. That happened, and the lizard came out of my bed. And then I was like, can we fix the Wi-Fi to fix the drones? And they were like, it will be a week. And I was like, it was so ridiculous. I was like, actually, I had a moment of realization. I was just like, I don't want to do this. I know what I want to do. I want to do stand-up comedy and journalism. And so I called the CEO and I said, hey, listen, I'm quitting. And he was like, have you considered performing stand-up comedy to the Sri Lankan farmers? And I said, that might be tricky, considering I don't speak their language.
That's a tough sell.
Yeah. But so that's when I decided, that's when I like zeroed in on it. And I said, this is what I'm going to do. And then from there, I went back to America, traveled the country on Greyhound buses, just doing open mics across the country. Again, another example of how I was just able to do that. Another example of just like how money can help you travel and get better. Another example of how stand-up really isn't that much of a meritocracy. But still, I was like, this is what I'm going to try and do. And so, yeah, I've been doing that for a while now.
Wow. And so you're going around all over the country on Greyhound buses, and just finding open mics. Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah. And so how many years have you been doing that?
I did my first mic, I guess it would be 6 years ago now, I believe. And I've been doing it seriously for about 5 years.
And I'm curious, you talked a little bit about kind of, now that you've been doing it, you've seen sort of the business side of it and, how to navigate that. Talk a little bit about that. Like, I think people sort of glamorize Or maybe not. Nobody sees what happens before you get on stage,
Hmm.
and how that works. I mean, are you finding your way through that business? Do you get an agent? I mean, like, how do you go about building a career in comedy?
It's all self-driven.
Hmm.
You can get an agent. It kind of, but nowadays to get an agent, you need to have a following,
Hmm.
and you can only build a following by creating stuff yourself.
Hmm.
The same way with then even this podcast.
Hmm.
It's not like there were people back. It's not like there are people backing you. It's like your own decision to
Hmm.
start this
Hmm.
and grow it from the ground up. And so yeah, you have to get better at stand up. And the only way to get better at stand up, you can't have people just pushing you or anything like that. You just have to get up on stage and practice and practice and practice and run
Hmm.
as many reps as possible
Hmm.
and travel and meet people
Hmm.
and just try and get better. And so that's what I was doing a since from around 2020 until the end of 2022, just literally traveling every single week for comedy and
Hmm.
performing every single day for comedy, trying to get better. And now I still do that, but
Hmm.
I'm having a bit of success here in Columbus
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
So it's
We'll talk about Columbus. I'm curious, I want to talk about the success you're having, and also I'm kind of curious about how comedy has changed, with being able to put content out in so many different places, but and that following, the importance of following.
mhm.
But how did you end up in Columbus?
I had just graduated college in 2020 in a pandemic, and it was September, and all my friends were starting their jobs in New York, on Wall Street. I didn't have anything going on, so I was like, I'm going to do a road trip across the country. I'm going to visit every place named London in America, because I had lost my passport, so I couldn't go back to London
Uh-huh.
to be with my family during the pandemic. So I
Okay.
was like, I'll make the best of a situation. I'll go to every London in America. And so I was going to London, Ohio, which was the
Uh-huh.
second London
Uh-huh.
of my journey.
Okay.
And
Where was the first?
the first was London, Pennsylvania, which
Okay.
does not exist.
Okay.
It's just the side of a highway.
Did you have to get there to realize that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. When I looked up London, Pennsylvania, nothing showed up,
Okay.
but it was on Google Maps. And so I went,
Got it.
and it was truly just the side of the highway,
Uh-huh. And you
and
just kept going to the next London.
there was nothing there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just kept on going, and that was the trend with a few of them. London, Missouri,
Uh-huh.
I turned up. It turned out it had actually been recently renamed to Tokyo, Missouri.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, good, very foreign of you. London, Tennessee didn't exist. It was just Del Rio, Tennessee.
Okay.
So it had just been misnamed on Google Maps.
Uh-huh.
It was a lot of that. It was a lot of
That's very anticlimactic
it was a
to.
lot of 8-hour solo road trips just to
Uh-huh.
discover
Yeah.
that it was all in vain.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you were learning a lot on these road trips. And when you arrived in London, Ohio, um, first impressions, is this your first time in Ohio?
It was my second or third time actually in Ohio. I'd been up to Cleveland a few
Okay.
times.
Okay.
Um,
So you knew something more than just London, Ohio about Ohio.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
exactly. And I was having a nice time. I'd stopped by in Cleveland 2 days before. I had gone skydiving over Canton, Ohio, which was, a beautiful place to skydive over.
Uh-huh.
Lots of farmland to admire.
Sure. Yep. Yep.
And then I'd been in Columbus the night before, got to London, and it was it was charming. I kind of went in. This is another thing that I found very nice about all of this London trip. I kind of went in with this, like I would say coastal and like um, naive attitude of like
Mm-hmm.
small town America. Every London was like a place like 1,000 people or smaller,
Mm-hmm.
and all very small towns. And I'd gone on with this like big like, oh, they're idiots over there.
Yeah.
And then when you get there and you go to all these small places and you chat with the residents and
Mm-hmm.
you have dinner with them and you spend time with them, you're like, you're the loveliest people I've ever met. You care about your community that you're a part of.
Sure.
And I think we all do. And we're all searching for community, and
Yeah.
you found yours. And it just so happens your community isn't it just so happens that America doesn't have one fixed community. don't really know what I'm trying to say is I think just people in these small towns care about their communities.
Yeah.
And so I just I left with a much greater appreciation of small town America and the people within them. And I thought a lot of them were just filled with a lot more love than the hate they're characterized as having. And yeah, I'm sorry, the day before I went to London, Ohio, I'd stopped by Columbus and I'd bumped into 3 guys who I went to college with on the street. And I was like, what are you guys doing here? And they were like, oh, we just moved here for quarantine. And I was like, oh, let's get a drink. And so we got a drink. And I left my number for the bartender because I was like, I'll never be in Columbus again. What do I have to lose? First time I'd ever left my number for someone. And she texted back and I was like, this place is amazing. This place is where dreams come true. So I just moved it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you've been calling Columbus your home now, huh?
Yeah, like 2.5 years or so.
Yeah. And yeah, I like I said, I saw your bit on Columbus and thought it was really funny having lived here most of my life, and really understanding all of that.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about, let's back up and talk a little bit about kind of the business and, how you are actually making this work, and I have no idea like to what extent what does that even mean? And, what your goals are and, where you are in that part of the journey. But you're on the journey of being a professional comedian. And, I'm curious just how much you have learned about how things have changed and how things are done. It does seem like today every comedian has a podcast or, is still doing stand up. I mean, stand up still seems to be a thing that even the biggest comedians do, and maybe they do it for money. It seems like they just love it, and they also, have the whole special thing, which is been around a long time, but that seems to be more and more prevalent with streaming. And anyway, the business just seems to have changed a lot, and I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious, from your standpoint, and maybe for anybody else is out there, listening, how you really can navigate that. How do you build, yeah, a following, or how do you actually, find yourself moving up through the ranks as a comedian?
Yeah, it's pretty much it's never been a better time, I think, to be a comedian because nowadays it's all about social media. It's all about Instagram Reels and
Hmm.
TikTok
Hmm.
in terms of growing a following, those and Facebook and YouTube Shorts.
Hmm.
Those are like the 4 most helpful things that can help a comedian grow. In the past, it was always, are you out in New York?
Hmm.
Are you out in LA? Are
Hmm.
you getting seen by an agent who will put you on the Tonight Show? And and when you get on the Tonight Show, then you can go play B rooms
Hmm.
across, or you can play small comedy clubs across the country. Maybe you can feature for a bigger name across the country. But now, with the advent of all these streaming of Instagram and TikTok, where anyone can put anything out, and there's no gatekeeper who's saying, "Oh, we're just going to show this comedian to a million people, and we're not going to show this comedian." Nowadays, it's just a question of, if anything, it's even more of a meritocracy because if people like the clip and engage with it, then it's going to get pushed to
Hmm.
more and more people. And again, it's not necessarily true. Sometimes if the topic has a fiery content,
Hmm.
and then it will have a lot of comments, and then the algorithm will push it.
Hmm.
Sure, that's an unfair way, but also your content is now being spread to so many more people than it was originally.
Hmm.
You can develop a fan base just like that. And so
Hmm.
I have so many comedian friends who are blowing up, so to speak,
Hmm.
because they're putting out their stuff online and people are connecting with it, and it spreads far quicker than just traveling the country and having like 100 people at once see your set and be like, I'm a fan.
Right.
Now you can get 10,000 fans overnight.
I'm curious how that changes things, or if that changes things for you. I mean, do you find yourself thinking about subject matters that might be more likely to go viral, or do you think about, kind of the content differently because of the format that you're, relying on getting it out there in?
I think if I was super strategic about all of it, I would be.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think being super strategic slightly defeats the purpose
Right.
of what you're trying to do.
Right.
And so it's kind of I think it's a balance.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't necessarily want to just be like, oh, I'm going to just write jokes about gun control and abortion.
Right.
And then have my comments blow up.
Right.
Because people are arguing and they don't focus on the joke.
Right.
Obviously, you want first and foremost to write good joke, be funny.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. But then I've seen great comedians post hilarious clips about meaningless stuff, which is very funny, and then it doesn't catch on with the algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's just like the game comedians nowadays are playing, which it's not the best way, because it doesn't always reward the best content. But if you learn to play the game and you're good at what you do, I think you'll get rewarded, which has always been the case. You had to learn to play the game of how to get on network TV, of how to get a late night set. And now you just need to learn to play the game of how to have the algorithm boost you and not have everyone in the comments be like, this guy sucks.
I'm also curious, when you think about content creation, what that's like for you, from like a idea to like getting the idea down on paper to actually like refining it. Like, tell me a little bit about your process to getting something to the point that you want to put it out there.
Yeah. I think I never think putting it out there is the most important part. I always think the most important part is, I think also when I write jokes, and I'm sure this is true for almost all comedians, it's less about will this go viral and more about will this make the people in this room here laugh. And that's the most important part, because you can be hilarious online, but if people come to your show and then they see you live and they don't laugh, then that's terrible. That's way worse.
Right.
People online are, in my opinion, like I don't mind too much about what people online think about me, but I do care about what the people in the room who I'm with, who have paid money to see me, I want to make them happy. And so a lot of the stuff I write, I'm not thinking about will it go viral. I'm just thinking about, am I writing something that's interesting, that maybe reflects a greater truth within the joke itself. Maybe if I'm writing a story, why should I tell this story? What's interesting about the story? And just trying to make it engaging for the viewer.
Yeah. Do you find yourself like having to turn it off, or like seeing humor like in everything? Like, I mean, I would imagine it's like a fashion designer walks into can't help but to look at what everybody's wearing, or for me, I observe architecture. It's I'm wondering if like you're constantly like having your brain working, like that would be funny.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think I haven't had a serious thought maybe since I started comedy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the brain of any comedian.
Yeah.
When you takes over your life and you're like, oh, that's funny. When you're apologizing to someone, or like or someone's apologizing to you, or something really sad is happening. It's just your instinct just to go for the comedic mindset. And then, because you're just thinking of it, that's your brain. It's just funny. But then it's also on the reverse. I remember when I was young, my dad would tell me like a story about, or he'd say like, oh, when things get pitched in the SNL pitch room, Lorne Michaels never laughs. He just says, that's funny, with a straight face, and moves on. And I was always like, that's impossible. How can someone not find something funny? And now I don't laugh at comedians. I'm like, that's funny.
Yeah.
But I don't laugh because you just see it so much. It's just, it's your reality.
Yeah. Who does anyone make you laugh? I mean, who do you look up to, at least?
A lot of like silly, absurd people make me laugh a
Uh-huh.
lot. But people I look up to are just any comics who can really capture an audience's attention and energy.
Yeah.
You know, people like obviously Steve Martin,
Yeah.
like '90s Chris Rock
Uh-huh.
is a big
Oh
one.
yeah.
And then even like quiet, like Mike Birbiglia.
Uh-huh.
I love you know, he can, if you can get an audience either cheering
Yeah.
and going crazy for you every 5 seconds, or a audience that's ready to like hear a pin drop
Mm-hmm.
because they're on. I think both sides are what I really like, and so trying to combine those
Mm-hmm.
two elements. And then I love the silliest comedians of all time who
Mm-hmm.
just, there's one Norwegian comedian called Viggo Venn, who I'm sure no one listening has ever heard of,
Uh-huh.
but he has a hilarious 5-minute tape on YouTube, and
Uh-huh.
it's well worth watching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. I'll check it out. I'm just thinking about the pandemic, and we would go to see Chappelle
Hmm.
in Yellow Springs. And a few things I was thinking about while we were talking from that experience. One was just how, like, it was like a public service, to make people laugh, especially when people need to laugh. And I think we always need to laugh. It's very healing to laugh. It's very cathartic. It's very energizing, right? It's good. Something about the energy of laughing is so you know healing and uplifting. And so you get to do that for people. That's got to be a good feeling, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the best. It's the best job in the world. Not
Yeah.
only are you getting something out of it by having people laugh, and you're feeling you've accomplished something, but that it's a positive sum relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's getting something out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. I mean, it's the same with that. It's with almost all the stuff you do. It's not just about you, but it's about having it's about making everyone's lives better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, it's another reason. Well, it's actually the main reason. I know I said I moved to Columbus just because I met those friends, and that girl gave me her number.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I actually came out was because I was like, I did some comedy shows in some apartments at the time, and everyone was like, we'd love to have some comedy
Mm-hmm.
in like downtown Columbus. Like, we'd love to
Mm-hmm.
have a comedy club in Columbus. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, listen, I don't have anything going on, but it would be great to, it's always nice to not give something back, but just to create something of positive value.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, I'm going to move to Columbus
Mm-hmm.
and try and get comedy going
Mm-hmm.
in downtown, in the short north,
Mm-hmm.
and everywhere around Columbus, where people can feel excited about, like, even just a small part
Mm-hmm.
a little bit extra excited about living in Columbus,
Mm-hmm.
that there's one extra thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, like, that's, along with the performing, the producing of comedy shows
Mm-hmm.
is equally as rewarding, because you're putting on these good shows, and you're getting a lot out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But then the best part is when other people get something out of it. It's like, that's like the best. That makes whatever you're doing worthwhile, right?
That's great. I'm excited to hear more about that. Maybe we'll talk off air about kind of where you're at with, that piece, the piece of, making Columbus a better city. Because I do really think that those are the kinds of things that are incredibly valuable to a city like Columbus. I've been kind of pounding this drum from a variety of angles, that the importance of culture and really the arts,
Mm-hmm.
and entertainment, music, comedy, public art, having just like cool, fun shit to do is like economic development,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are not going to get people to move here. We are not going to attract venture capital. We're not going to do a lot of things if people don't love the offerings here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd love to talk to you more about, where you're at with that, and how maybe we can, collaborate there. Going back to just the kind of act of being a comedian, I'm kind of, curious. The other thing that I was really struck by when I would go to Yellow Springs is Chappelle would fly in all these guys. We saw Louis C.K. one night, we saw Chris Rock, we'd see, all kinds of up and coming comedians. And there was one night Chris Rock was there, And it was like super cool. I've seen Chris Rock. I've seen 90s Chris Rock. I've seen him a bunch. But now you're in this cornfield with a couple hundred people during the pandemic, and Chris Rock is there, and you're 10 feet away. And he comes out with a piece of paper, and he's like clearly working on new
Hmm.
material, and he's bombing. He
Yeah.
actually was
Yeah.
bombing, which was like, it was at first kind of a bummer, but then I'm like, this is actually really cool because I'm seeing one of the greats work on his craft. And so I'm curious, to hear a little bit about what that's like to work on it. Do you like dedicate time to sit down and write jokes and then try them out on people on stage? Where do you go? You might not have the luxury of being Chris Rock, where you can go, walk on any stage any night and bomb, and you're still going to get your Netflix special, right? So I'm just kind of curious for you, the process of, kind of putting material together and then, working it to the point that you're satisfied with it.
Like I said, you're always thinking funny. You're always trying to think, is this funny? Is that funny? Maybe you have a thought. You write it down in your notes app or on your notepad, and then you'll just come back to it the next day and be like, what can I get out of this? And when you learn how to write a joke, you realize it's just setup. It's just setup, punchline, or
Mhm.
premise, setup, punchline. You just need to figure out those three elements. And it takes time. You can have the formula down, but then the content of the joke is not necessarily the funniest.
Mhm.
But it's just that. It's just writing and writing and writing. And when you get to learn your voice and who you are as a comedian, it becomes easier because then you can write in your voice. It's almost like you're parodying yourself in terms of, you think, how would, if I were to parody Chris Rock, for example, which I don't think I would parody him word for word, but you have to think about that for yourself as well. Like, how would Simon write this joke?
Mhm.
And then you write it out and you're like, okay, this is consistent with my voice. It has the joke, it has the premise, it has the setup, it has the punchline. Then you take it on stage and you see how it goes. And what's interesting about Chris Rock, because he does it all the time, everyone's like, welcome to the stage, Chris Rock. And
Mhm.
then everyone's like, oh my God, it's Chris Rock.
Mhm.
And then he comes on stage and he bombs. And he does that not because he's just trying to give the audience a bad time. He's trying to, number one, work out his material and also bring down the energy so much because he is such a known for being such a high energy comedian
Mhm.
and for being such a famous comedian. He just wants to tell those jokes and gauge the audience's reaction
Mhm.
while still removing the element of him being Chris Rock
Mhm.
from the room. So he
Mhm.
just wants to see if the jokes stand up on them by themselves rather than just being Chris Rock, which I guess is a side note, but it's an interesting way of how he does it.
Do you ever write with other people?
Uh, I don't that much,
Mhm.
but I should. It's writing with other people is so helpful. You're
Mhm.
just able to spin and like riff and throw ideas against each other
Mhm.
and see what comes back. It's a lot. It's just all it is just throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks.
Mhm.
And you take it to this, and you only know when you take it on stage. You can write the funniest thing down
Mhm.
on a notepad, and then you take it on stage, and everyone's like,
Mhm.
"That doesn't make sense."
Yeah. It's interesting because I think maybe stereotypically, comedians can often be sort of loners, or kind of, get in their own heads. And, it's been well documented about, the addiction, and, um, far too many that, died too
Yeah.
young, kind of thing. It's prevalent in the comedian world. And I'm wondering, how much of the high of getting people to laugh, or how much of like that, and this isn't necessarily, I don't know if it's true for you, but and I'm making a generalization about comedians, that there seems to be some sort of deep need to either be liked or validated, or get the laugh. And so I'm wondering, like, how do you find that line between the beauty of making somebody laugh and like needing the laugh? You know what I mean? It seems like a fine line.
I can only speak for myself.
Hmm.
But it is a really interesting question. And I often find myself a lot of the time being like, do I need this laugh? Why do I need this laugh?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a lot of I said I could only speak for myself, but I think a lot of I like to think of myself, even though I said I was like a weird kid growing
Mm-hmm.
up. I like to think of myself now as a very normal person,
Mm-hmm.
and just a random guy who happens to do stand-up comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think a lot of people are chasing, it's like what they need.
Mm-hmm.
They need it to keep going. I don't necessarily know if I need it. It's just, I want to know that I've written a good joke and that it works. Like you just
Mm-hmm.
want, like laughter is proof of success. And it's why like when you tell a joke for the 100th time and it works, you're kind of like, okay, that's good. Like I know, or at least that's how I feel. Like when I
Mm-hmm.
tell one of my classic, or not one of my classic jokes, but one of the jokes that I do a lot
Mm-hmm.
and it works, I'm like, yep, that's to be expected.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the expectation. But when you tell that joke for the first time
Mm-hmm.
and it works, that's the best feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a way better feeling than getting on stage and killing in front of however many people. Because that's the expectation, is that these jokes work, they should laugh.
Mm-hmm.
But that first time, I think that's the most exciting thing for me,
Mm-hmm.
is when you try something new and it works. And I think most comedians would probably agree with that.
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with like loving to make people laugh and loving what you do. It's really up to the individual to know. And that's not just about, comedy. That's in anything that we do, people pleasing or needing to be validated, money, awards, success, whatever it is, it's always a slippery slope. All right, so tell me, what should we know about, where you're at now, and you mentioned some of the things that you're thinking about doing or doing as far as producing comedy. Kind of give me the kind of the final where you're at, today in Columbus with what you're up to.
Yeah, the aim is just to keep on growing the Columbus comedy scene, to be part of it. There are other people doing great stuff in the comedy scene. But I like to think that what we're doing, I run the Don't Tell comedy shows, which pop up around town. We started a year ago to this day, I think, with a small 40-person show at the Locks Bagel Shop.
Mm-hmm.
And we did like a show every couple of months. And then I was kind of like, hey, let's escalate this. We've got the momentum. And so now we are throwing at least 4 shows every single weekend in different parts of town, and like secret BYOB locations
Mm-hmm.
around town. You never know who's going to be on a show. We bring in headliners from New York who you've seen on TV
Mm-hmm.
every single weekend, as well as like the best regional and local talent. And everyone who's been, I like to think, has had a good time. And they're really special. We've done like a bunch. We've sold out every show since September, which I think is a good thing. And the aim is just to keep on growing that, put on bigger and bigger shows, bring in bigger and bigger comics, and kind of ideally make it a thing when, like we were talking about in terms of growing the culture, when people visit Columbus for a weekend and they're like, what should we do? One of the top things that shows up on Google, one of the top things that everyone says to their friends who are visiting, we should go to a Don't Tell comedy show.
Mm-hmm.
Same way when people go to New York, they're like, you have to go to the Comedy Cellar, or you have to go see a comedy show. Ideally, that's the aim for Columbus.
That's great. It's your bit about Columbus and just what you just said has me thinking about something that I've really experienced here in growing my own business. And I'm from Columbus for the most part, and so that makes it easier. But it's such an easy city to get shit done, and I hope that's been your experience. I'm curious about it, but you can really stand things up here, and people will rally around you in a way that I don't think happens everywhere. There is a demand and there's a hunger for it, and if you're doing something good, you can really build something fairly quickly with a lot of support here.
Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable city in that way. It's
Mm-hmm.
just everyone's supportive. I think everyone in Columbus is eager for things to do. Everyone in Columbus is eager for their fellow residents to succeed and prop them up.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you were saying, I think it's people. I'm sure there's lots of small hate going around, but in general, it's a city where people want the city to succeed. And so we'll support people who succeed at through, and one of the main things is showing up.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for literally anything. Like I think it's true. If you put on something good in Columbus, people will show up.
Yeah.
It's a really special city.
Good. Well, I'm glad that's been your experience, and really happy to have a chance to spend some time with you and hear what you're doing here, and hopefully have a chance to collaborate. I know we're talking about doing some stuff at Gravity, and love to be supportive in you making Columbus a better place through comedy. And I don't know if you have any kind of final thoughts, anything you want to share. We'll make sure people know where to find you. But anything else you want to share as we wrap up?
I just wanted to thank you for having me, and also, again, someone who's doing way more to make Columbus a better place, to make it exciting, and all the initiatives that you do, and this podcast, and everything with Gravity. It's amazing. And I know we chatted a little bit before on the phone. But yeah, it's inspiring, and I really appreciate you having me on and being one of the leaders in terms of making Columbus happen, and also just being a good person.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, Simon, thanks. It was fun.
Thank you.